I feel like I might be bullying a bit, as this video we're looking at today is 8 years old, and it's entirely possible that the dude who made it has changed his opinions on these things. But I never really got over being called an idiot 6 years ago by the creator, and I figure it's better late than never.
Why anybody who tells you to use Node.js is an idiot.
So I get that people need to have clickbait, and I realize that these big, bold titles probably get more hits than something nuanced like I personally don't like Node.js. Still, I think it's kind of absurd to group an entire user base together based on their choice of programming languages. However, based on the tone of the actual content of the video and the vitriol in his comment section, I don't actually think this is clickbait. This guy honestly believes what he's saying, and it's just really, really uninformed. So let's just get into it, and I'll make my criticisms known as we go on.
If you don't know what Node.js is, just ignore this video because it won't make any sense to you anyway, and I apologize that I can't give you all of the background information to get you up to speed on why you'd use Node.js, but you're better off for it because Node.js is a complete waste of effing time.
Okay, sorry. We got to stop right here. This is a nitpick, but I really hate when people do this swearing by using the first letter thing. He's reading a script clearly, so this kind of implies that he wrote this. So if you want to say fuck, just say fuck. You're not fooling anyone.
Node.js is built on a bunch of lies. Big lies. Not little lies, big lies.
Okay. This is a valid enough thesis, and the logic follows. If we can determine that it's built on a factory of lies, then it's probably reasonable to conclude that, indeed, you might be stupid for using the platform. Surely he has nice, overwhelming evidence to support his hypothesis.
The very first line on their website says, Node.js is a platform built on Chrome's JavaScript runtime for easily building fast, scalable network applications. Now, let's start with scalable network and JavaScript.
Oh, it's one of those.
Now, JavaScript is slow. It is very slow.
I guess if you assert something, it just has to be true. Like, who needs evidence when you have assertions? Slow is a relative term in comp sci. There's the obvious execution time, which admittedly in the 90s was basically all that mattered. But now another feature of the language is how well it handles concurrency. As an example, I coded up an HTTP server in C and Node.js, and I tried to make them do the exact same thing. Also, please forgive my C. It's been years since I really touched the language, and I'm really rusty with it. Now, C is generally considered a fast language, I think, but my C server will be slow due to the fact that it can only handle one request at a time. It required 55 lines of code and will be pretty difficult to maintain, and has the risk of seg faults and memory errors, and it just wasn't fun to write, if I'm being totally honest. Now let's compare this to the JavaScript version. It does the exact same thing as the C one. It's only 12 lines of code, and will handle concurrent requests faster, and will also give us full garbage collection, meaning we get fewer memory errors. Now, of course, I could write a faster version of the C1 by using select or epoll or spinning up new threads on each request. But my point is, you don't magically get a fast product by using a quote-unquote fast language, whatever that means. It's really tough to say if JavaScript is slow, because the emphasis for JavaScript is very different than C. For example, I don't think I've ever heard that you should be using Node.js to calculate the digits of pi or something. It'd be stupid for anyone to suggest that.
You can get blocked for doing CPU things. Blocking simply means that a thread has to pause and wait for something to happen. If you say, hey thread, calculate pi to 100 decimal places, it's going to sit there and do it. And it's going to do it in JavaScript.
Oh my goodness. It's not controversial to say that JavaScript is slow for CPU-bound stuff, and I don't think anyone would ever argue with you on that point. CPU performance was never a stated goal of JavaScript. And this actually was an issue with Node early on because people couldn't get SSL to work correctly with it without using an Nginx proxy. And just to prove I'm honest, I wrote a simple summing app in JavaScript and C, and of course, we can see here the C version's a lot faster. However, the idea of something like Node.js is that an app like a website isn't typically bound by the CPU. Most web applications boil down to something like get a request, read from the database, format the data in JSON or something, then send it back to the user. And it's generally not very taxing on the CPU. These kinds of problems are called I/O bound, and this is universally accepted across all of engineering that I've seen. And that's why a non-blocking system is important. I/O bound problems can be difficult because older languages can require blocking the thread, reducing the number of concurrent users that can use your system. We could, of course, spin up a new thread to handle this, but threads are actually pretty expensive.
This is an event-driven, non-blocking I/O model. Now, what they mean is that Node.js is designed to never have to write to the hard drive.
So this is actually just the complete opposite of correct. Non-blocking I/O is actually incredibly useful for reading and writing to the hard drive. If we look at the Node.js API, there are actually lots of functions for dealing with writing to the hard drive. And even if you think the Node.js developers are idiots and liars, we can also look at the Java non-blocking I/O libraries, and it also has functions for reading and writing from the hard drive. Non-blocking I/O has nothing to do with hard drives. It has everything to do with multiplexing I/O operations on a single thread without, blocking it. Node.js didn't invent this. The Select API has been around almost as long as Unix, and Mac's KQ and Linux's epoll came out in 2000 and 2001, respectively. Node.js just made it relatively easy for novice programmers to take advantage of it.
Makes it lightweight. Have you ever said to yourself, yeah, I'm gonna build something complex in JavaScript because it'll be lightweight?
Well, it might make me stupid, but I would actually be one of those people. JavaScript was built for browsers in the mid-90s with old 100 megahertz CPUs and 8 megabytes of RAM. My phone has 6 cores and 4 gigabytes of RAM, meaning you'd be able to chomp through JavaScript pretty easily.
It's slow, it's clunky, it's not compiled, it's anything but lightweight.
Is that really your criteria? You know what else isn't compiled? Bash. Are you suggesting we stop using Bash? That's very intellectual.
Perfect for data-intensive, real-time applications that run across distributed devices. If you haven't figured out from my previous set of complaints with the sentences that are on here, data-intensive, not going to happen, especially if you're non-blocking I/O, because you either have to be reading the data or you have to be writing the data.
We've already covered this, but just to reiterate, non-blocking I/O in no way whatsoever stops you from reading and writing from the hard drive. In fact, for data-intensive applications, concurrency typically matters a lot more than anything else.
Real time. Well, it's JavaScript, so it's not going to be as real time as a lot of the other things that are out there.
Now, I actually agree, though for different reasons. I've always hated the term real-time since it's really poorly defined across domains. Typically, when I think real-time, I think about stuff that requires microsecond precision, like a flight navigation system or a pacemaker, not some dumb web app. The Node.js site actually has, since this video, taken their wording off their site, so presumably they agreed with me. Microsoft
Node gives Azure users the first end-to-end JavaScript experience. That doesn't sound like a good thing to me.
That's because you're short-sighted and really have no idea what you're talking about. There is value in being able to share code and libraries between front-end and back-end. Validation can be identical, meaning we have fewer requests being made to the server, and the code base can have less duplication all around.
To make it even more sucky, Node requires its own HTTP server. You don't just run, Apache or Nginx or any of those.
Now, I'm assuming by requires you mean includes, and you have to implement it. This is true, but that's because the design of Node is sufficiently different from the CGI mod PHP system, and it necessitates its own server. The Node.js server is actually mostly written in C++ and just exposes a JavaScript interface.
You have to install their thing. And there's a lot of people that are finding that in order to get Node to scale up the way that it should, you have to put a caching proxy in front of it. So you end up running something like Lighty or Fugue or Nginx in front of the Node HTTP server so that you can get any kind of scale, because otherwise this thing that's supposed to be non-blocking my I/O has definite concurrency issues and doesn't scale up, and it consumes huge amounts of resources very quickly.
First off, load balancing isn't exactly unique to Node. I've had to write systems that use an Nginx load balancer to proxy to other Nginx apps. Nginx proxies are pretty fast, and if you want your system to be fault tolerant, being able to dynamically redirect traffic if there's an app crash is really useful.
They're pushing you to use something that doesn't follow the CGI standard.
Are you seriously going to criticize something for not using the CGI standard? If you want to talk about performance, which you clearly care a lot about, CGI has been deprecated for the most part, and even in 2012, because using CGI typically involves spinning up a new process each and every request. And a new process can take upwards of a megabyte of memory on modern systems, not even getting into the cost of having to allocate resources and isolate things. Fast CGI was built to help alleviate this, but I would almost argue that not following the CGI standard would be a feature, not a bug. But I should say would be, because virtually anything that can write to the command line can technically do CGI, including Node. It's just that, no one in their right mind would use it because of how stupidly slow CGI's overhead is compared to the cooperative system of Node.
And they're pushing you to use this weird HTTP server that who knows what weird security issues come from it, because it's not well deployed, it's not hugely well tested, it doesn't follow the RFC model.
I'll actually give them a pass on this one. In 2012, Node.js wasn't used that frequently, and it wasn't unreasonable to assume that there might be some uncaught security bugs. Nowadays, Node is used all over the place and is generally considered okay for production. Now, I should actually make it clear that I don't really like Node.js, though performance has nothing to do with that. I've just never liked callback-based concurrency. I find it's really easy to code yourself into a corner with that. And I don't really want to pick on this guy. He's just a random ding-dong who doesn't know what he's talking about. But he's a symptom of something much worse that I see permeate in engineering spaces from time to time. And that's the cult of benchmarks and pretending that every single line of code needs to be optimal in order for things to be useful. At the end of the day, talk is cheap, but code maintenance is not. As I stated, my dumb C example is written in a quote-unquote fast language, but I wouldn't want to maintain it, and I wrote the damn thing. In a real industry setting, it's almost always cheaper to simply buy better hardware than it is to pay someone to chop off 10 microseconds from the execution speed. For the vast majority of web apps, trying to do things in the most optimal way possible is going to lead you to a world of hurt, especially if you're a beginner. And that's the issue, because beginners watch these videos and decide they have to do things in Java or C++ or D or Rust or some language that's ostensibly faster, and then they never get anything done and they might get frustrated and leave. Instead of trying to find the fastest or most optimal language, maybe just make sure the damn thing works first and possibly rewrite parts in a faster language if you need to. In whatever system you find to be comfortable, be it PHP, Go, Haskell, Erlang, or GASP, Node.js.